Today's episode on the Lifestyle-Based Healing podcast is about the food pyramid, and we're going to talk about what the food pyramid is, how guidelines like this get made, why they're not really about health so much as other things, and of course, what you should do instead when approaching healthy eating. Let's jump into it. Hello and welcome to the Lifestyle-Based Healing podcast. Today you have myself, co-host Dylan, and my other co-host and mom, Robin.
Hi, everyone.
And today's topic is one that actually I picked. It's about the food pyramid. Long ago, I was a kid, and I guess I was just born this way, but I was just obsessed with nutrition and making my body run optimally. So much to the point where I had this bulletin board as a kid, and I printed out, or someone gave me the food pyramid, and I tacked it to my bulletin board, and then I memorized it. So I think I still remember it to this day, all the different portions you're supposed to eat every day and what a portion looks like. But it turns out a lot of that stuff isn't exactly accurate. It's changed over time. And when I reflect about today, I don't ever eat according to that anymore. I don't even think about it really. So wanted to just dive in and ask you a few questions about this. Since you're a dietitian, you've gone through a lot of this training, you know some of the history, and so that's the topic for today. What do you think?
That's great. I think it's a great topic, and I walk in here and Dylan's tells me this topic, so I'm quickly going through my mind going, okay, what do I know about this? It has changed over the years, and I think the initial idea about the food pyramid was to help people sort of categorize their food and to live healthier lives. And I was interested, so I kind of dove in really quick and checked what Google had to say about it. And it really did start back in the 70s, and it was reflecting something that Sweden was doing. And they were Swedish at that time. The Swedes were trying to, show an example, apparently, according to what I read, of reasonably priced foods that also brought health. Okay, and so staples that they could have, and so it was the kind of the grains at the bottoms and the fruits and vegetables and that sort of thing. And so the initial food pyramid sort of modeled that, but over time it has changed, and now it's the My Plate, right? Are you familiar with that?
A little bit. So it sounds like the food pyramid was made not just with food in mind, but subject to like budget as well.
The Swedish one was, and
Swedish.
Then,
so it was like the original
concept behind it.
And then I guess
was
the USDA got wind of it and decided to
and
make their
so
own?
The food pyramid sort of evolved more like in the early 90s. So you think about
that makes sense.
That would make sense, right?
When I got my grubby little child hands on it.
Yeah, it would definitely make sense. And so that it was kind of being promoted in schools and that sort of thing as their initial way of trying to teach nutrition was a way to kind of categorize things and have kids think. And of course, I embraced that. I was trying as a young mom, trying to teach my kids how to eat well.
Yeah, I think it gave me like an awareness, right?
Right.
Whereas we will often say people just eat on autopilot, where we don't even think about what we're putting in. It's just food. It goes down the hatch. But that definitely built a consciousness around like, I should probably be eating more of these foods and less of these foods. So
yeah, and so back then I wasn't a dietitian.
Right. Yeah.
I was just a mom, and so I trying to figure out ways to be healthy and that sort of thing and nourish your kids, and so it did put an emphasis and kind of out there. I think the food pyramid has evolved, and there is a lot of criticism about it. Because of how it's developed, and so you'll see that this is my criticism of it as well.
So let's iron out what the food pyramid is actually.
Okay.
So I think we can bring up a diagram, but the way it's constructed will kind of help us with what you're kind of going towards.
Right. Yeah. And so the bottoms was typically grains,
I remember
cereals and grains.
6 to 11 servings per day, or it's like the most.
Yeah, it was kind of, so if you think of a pyramid, whatever's on the bottom is what you mostly should be consuming. And then the next level up was fruits and vegetables. And
fruits is like the next tier, and then vegetables was like maybe 3/5 of the tier.
Well, they actually swapped it out later, I think.
Oh.
I think initially maybe it was just kind of a big category.
I memorized this. So
okay, yeah.
I could still picture it in my mind.
Okay.
You had the next tier up on the pyramid, and you had like 3/5 of the vegetables. Sorry.
Yeah.
And that was like, I remember the fruits was like 3 to 5, or maybe 2 to 4 servings, and then vegetables was 3 to 5.
Yeah, I don't remember the serving sizes. Yeah.
Right. And did you have anything you had to add on that?
No. Okay. And then the next level up, yeah.
The next level up was like dairy and then meats.
Yes.
And those were even less servings because it was farther up the pyramid. It's smaller amount. And then at the top was like the sweets.
And fats, yeah.
Not the top because it's good, top because it's what you're not supposed to eat.
Yeah.
I didn't know it was actually fat too.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if that came at the beginning or at the end. And the reason I say fats is because I remember one of my very first nutrition classes, like when I was thinking about becoming a dietitian, I went back and took it the junior college a nutrition class, and of course they presented the food pyramid, and I had a young man in my class, and he kept saying, we need to, fats are really important. They're at the top. We need to add them in. And I'm like, no, you've got it reversed. It's like the fats are supposed, and the sweets are supposed to be very little at the top.
Common misconception.
Yeah, and so this is, I think, where the confusion became, right?
Okay.
It's like, is the top of the pyramid good, even though it was a really small part, or is it not something we good? And we had to do a menu plan. He kept trying to add bacon in, right? Like, bacon is not your friend, my friend.
I think bacon's not even on the pyramid.
Yeah. And so I think that was kind of a confusion, but you're spot on. And then later on, they added a line down the middle, I think, and then they added in exercise at some point.
Okay, yeah, I never got.
Yeah, and so this had these different iterations, but it was basically kind of those things. And then there was a lot of pushback and if you think about how let me back up. You think about how it started from a healthy eating on a budget type idea. Those were the more readily available, affordable foods for people. Meat and dairy products were harder to come by, and they were probably more expensive. So if you go back to the original Swedish version of it, right, it makes complete sense. And think about what really fills you up are those lower level things because they have a lot of fiber in them and they're readily available. So it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense when you think about it that way.
And if you think of other cultures, a lot of, the Asian cultures, rice is at every meal because it fills you up. It does bring nutrients, does bring calories, all those things. And they had very little health issues. And so it made complete sense. But over time, I think because of that misconception of good and bad and how much do I want to eat, even though it had the serving sizes in it, they went to something called My Plate. That was definitely a plate, so it gave you an example of what your plate should look like, and I think people could conceptualize that a little bit better. And about that time, I think they were getting a lot of pushback because in the U.S., how that food pyramid was actually determined and was, and some of the things decided was it's politics and science. Okay, those two things kind of came together, and if you look now, some of those foods that are still in there, like the dairy products, even though we know for so many people they can't digest dairy very well, there's a lot of lactose intolerance, it's still on the food pyramid, and there's not a lot of mention that some of the nutrients that come, calcium, which is the biggest one, can be derived from other foods. And so there started to begin this pushback and sort of this idea that, hey, the USDA, which is instrumental with the Health and Human Services, department to develop these guidelines, really has a vested interest in agriculture. Okay? And that's sort of their thing. And should they actually, is it a conflict of interest to be helping develop these guidelines for people because they have somewhat of a bias, to keep promoting those foods. Right. And so I think that's kind of where people started getting and a lot of pushback on it.
Yeah. So one, it's since the beginning, food pyramids and sort of these things have been not just about health. Like either they're trying to incorporate like budget and something that's accessible, or the USDA or some other body has other conflicts of interest on what actually is almost like deemed as ideal. And then just because it's on the food pyramid doesn't even mean it's necessarily ideal for you, almost.
Right.
which is probably where we're going to today's approach. But like it's right because there's other ways that you can build around to get the nutrients you need. So really, it's more about let's figure out what nutrients we need and how much per day. Not like let's categorize and drop mandatory, because if you put, like, for instance, we brought up dairy, or even like the fact that the top of the pyramid is the sugars or fats or whatever, it's almost like people are going to think that you have to get that. It's part of the pyramid, so you should have some of it in it.
Consciously add it.
Yeah,
right?
When you actually don't need it, and
No.
you probably should just. It's meant to say like you should have this as little as possible.
Right. It like use sparingly, and so. But yet, like I said, that example is like they thought they had to add it in, when in fact you're actually, if you're eating other foods, if you're eating nuts, you're getting some fats in there, right? I mean, that sort of thing. And so I just think it was a little more difficult for people to understand. But the plate now...
Yeah, what are they doing today?
The plate definitely is leaning more toward, fruits and vegetables, but it still has, a protein on it, and it still has you drinking dairy, and it still has you, and so those things are still incorporated into it, without giving people other options. They are getting better of saying, okay, in the protein portion, you can eat beans.
So explain this plate. What does it look like? Like,
well,
what's on the plate?
Yeah, it's changed. I don't follow the plate,
so the idea is you have a plate diagram, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is just what I know about it, and the plate is divided up into like quarters or thirds or whatever,
Yes.
and how much of your plate is supposed to be what food group.
Right.
So it's still food groups.
It's still food groups, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think what's
It's
kind of
just represented differently.
It's represented differently. It's still sort of the same idea of the pyramid now on a plate.
And now, now it's physically like you should just take up this much of your plate with
these food groups, right?
Okay.
And so then it's left to interpretation of, okay, what counts as a fruit and a vegetable, right? And how does my, can I throw on some French fries for the vegetable and have my Big Mac, right,
Yeah.
for the protein type thing? And so I think what they're just missing is that, and they're trying hard to help people, but I think there's a lot of, outside influences that are driving that pictorial. Mm-hmm. And I love that there are some outside groups now, Harvard's one of them, that now has something called like the healthy, food plate or something like that. So there's no outside influence, no bias on what's being shown. Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine has one as well, that is completely devoid of having outside influence being put on it. It's based on science. What's actually healthiest for our bodies. And if you look at that, it is leaning more into those foods that are whole foods, less dairy, less meat, less, fewer of those things, and more into the foods that have more fiber.
Yeah, so I mean, everyone has bias, so there's some bias,
yes.
But I guess you could say there's less big industry bias.
Right, there's less political action groups, there's less lobbyist influence, that sort of thing, because, and the USDA is taken out of it, right? The government's completely taken out of it. It's an outside group.
Yeah.
And so I think those are good additions. I think for a lot of people, I encourage people I work with, it's like, let's look at what you're currently eating and how to improve that. And just being more mindful, like you said, of what you're choosing, and because everybody feels differently with different foods.
Yeah.
And so, some people can't eat, dairy. Some people can't eat, really refined grains. Oils affect some people's digestion, and so it's figuring out where are those foods coming in and what does it look like. But what I'm here to say is that you can never go wrong eating more vegetables. Your mom was right, okay?
Eat your vegetables.
Yeah, eat your vegetables, and yet here in the U.S. we just eat so few.
What about nutrition labels? Because guess who makes those, right?
Absolutely.
So how does the bias enter into those? Because I know, for one thing, like those numbers, like the daily values, they've changed over time, slowly, and I think they're going in the right direction. But how does that get made, and what's the history behind that, if you know off the top of your head?
Off the top of my head. So they have recently changed, and they've changed to basically break down the types of fats that are in them. And they've also brought in some different vitamins that they now look at, and as well as they break down the sugars of whether they're added sugars or just total
so they
sugars.
make people break it all down, but also they make a distinction about how much of each thing you're supposed to be getting per day, right?
Yeah, I mean they do. They give you, but here's just what I think.
Percent daily value.
They get a percent daily value, but I think it's really hard. I do food. This is what I do, and I don't know what 2,000 calories, if I'm eating 2,000 calories a day, and they base it on 2,000 calories a day, and I think that's really hard for people to quantify.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, it's like, now, I can say I've worked with some women and men that have dieted a good portion of their lives, and they know calorie contents of things way better than I do. Okay, they'll know, there's X amount of calories in that, so they do tally their calories. I think it's hard for people to know how many calories that they're consuming in a day, and so I don't think those values are very useful.
Yeah, because it's not just about calories either. We know that's like barely anything, honestly. It's more about the actual nutritional content.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that component of the nutrition label is useful. I prefer to help people I work with actually look at those components differently and look at, for example, your total fats. Let's look at the fats. And, how many grams a day are you getting? And can we keep it under a certain amount? And what are they, saturated fats or are they monosaturated fats? Knowing that distinction, looking at your total sugars, and are they added sugars or total sugars, and how many grams a day are you taking in? I think that's way easier for people to tally, and stay in a guideline there, and it's the same thing with salts, right? Sodium. It's like super hard to know if you buy a sandwich that has bread, how much sodium is in that bread, and that could easily put you over your daily requirement.
Yeah, I remember we were just at dinner with my aunt, and she was saying all the things that we heard clients say, and one of them was, we're talking about how healthy she eats, which I think she does eat very healthy compared to most people, but she was saying how, like, when it comes to sodium, she doesn't add salt on anything. And it's funny to us because that's not where the salt comes in. The salt comes in, it's already just baked into so many things we eat. So
right. Yeah, I mean, anytime, and she's here visiting from New Zealand, and so I've had her at my home, and so this topic has come up again, right? It's just like, I said, well, if you go buy a sandwich, you're probably over your sodium content. She's like, how? I don't add, I go, it's baked in the bread. Bread is really high in sodium, right? And I go, there's no judgment, but this is where you start realizing you get over it. That's why we laugh when people tell us this, is because we know, because we've tried to keep, we've done a challenge keeping our sodium low. It is super hard.
Yeah, but that's where I think the percent daily values are helpful, when you look at it as more of the nutrient breakdown and building awareness around what's actually in the food.
Yeah.
Versus like how many calories everything is.
Yeah.
Because if you just focus on getting the right nutrients, then the calories work themselves out almost.
They really
and your
do.
body responds so much better.
Yeah, so that's why I think understanding those things, I mean, you should be reading labels. I mean, I encourage that by all means. And, because then you're kind of knowing what is actually coming in, to your body, what's on your plate. And gives you some guidelines to kind of understand, am I overdoing or underdoing? Or, we don't really have an underdoing issue so much in the U.S. aside from underdoing fiber.
Yeah.
And they do have a fiber label on there, and so you can start seeing, how much fiber a day am I getting?
So do you agree with the percent daily values that they set, like the guidelines for how much of everything you're supposed to be getting?
Well, they don't actually tell you how much you should be getting on the nutrition label, right?
They say, like, for instance, it's all based on a 2,000 calorie diet.
2,000 calorie diet, yeah. But not everybody, eats a 2,000 calorie diet, right?
Right.
So that's kind of hard to know.
But it's percentages, right? So you might consider scaling it up and say, if I exercise a lot and eat 3,000, I still want to get this percentage of fat and carbohydrate and protein.
Yeah, I think no, I don't actually agree with sort of how they break it down.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that it's still leaning too much into proteins. I think we want to have more complex carbohydrates in our diets, and we don't need as much protein as they are promoting, and because it was like, depends on what's the protein source.
Yeah.
There's so many nuances when
so
it comes to it.
So you think that's where the bias would come in then,
Mm-hmm.
potentially?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I saw that working in the school districts. They're pounding down the protein because they're offloading a lot of these commodity goods, and it's too much.
Yeah.
Because it's still calories and there's still fat that comes with a lot of those products.
Mm-hmm.
That aren't necessarily good for our health.
Again, it's not about health really at all. It's more about
that's a whole other topic, talking about the school lunches.
Yeah.
A whole other topic. And we'll have to save that for another day.
Well, cool. I think that's what I want to talk about with the food pyramid. Anything else we missed or you want to add?
No, I would just encourage people. I think there is some benefit to them if you're trying to get some guidelines, but I would say look at, like Harvard's healthy food plate, look at PCRM's healthy food plate, use that as your guideline, and really it comes down to just being aware. What are you choosing? What are you putting in? And that's the first shift, I think, that happens.
And that's a great tool for that, to start building a consciousness around it.
Mm-hmm. And you have a plate every day, and hopefully you're sitting down, and I think it is trying to promote health. It's just very few people pay attention.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining us for that one. I think it was a great conversation. If you like this content, make sure to like and subscribe. That way you get future updates and that other people see the video. And if you want further resources from us, you can go to therevitalizecenter.com. That's where we have other workshops you can attend and other free resources like our newsletter. We'd love to see you there. Otherwise, we'll see you in the next one.
Bye, everyone.